In the soft hush of dawn, Alara's world was painted in pale gold and sea mist. The tide whispered against the rocks beneath her window, carrying the distant scent of salt and unfinished dreams. She would wake early, brush the strands of wind-tangled hair from her face, and watch the ocean breathe, endless, forgiving, and always returning. Her art was born from moments like these, from the quiet ache between heartbeats. On this morning, she walked to the edge of the pier with her sketchbook pressed to her chest, unaware that the day would draw the first line of a story that would rewrite her forever. Somewhere behind her, a stranger watched her from the steps of the bookshop. His gaze soft, his presence unannounced. That was how Adrian entered her world. Not with thunder, but with silence that felt like destiny. Later that morning, Alara met Maeve at the corner cafe where the windows were always fogged and the coffee tasted faintly of salt. They sat by the window, laughing about small things. Maeve's latest misadventure, the stubbornness of Alara's cat, the way Autumn refused to leave the town. Beneath the laughter, there was a stillness, the kind that exists before something changes. Alara spoke of the sea, of how she felt seen for the first time in a long while, though she didn't know why. Maeve smiled knowingly, stirring sugar into her coffee, and said some people enter our lives like a tide, gentle, but capable of pulling us under before we even realize we're drowning. That evening, Alara returned to the shore with her paints. The horizon burned crimson, the sea turning molten beneath it. She painted until color bled into night, each brushstroke a confession. She didn't know what she was waiting for, only that she was no longer painting alone. Somewhere behind her, faint footsteps echoed against the sand. A voice, quiet but certain, said her name. She turned to find the stranger from the bookshop standing a few steps away, his eyes reflecting both recognition and uncertainty. It was the kind of moment that didn't need words. It simply existed, fragile and infinite. They spoke as night descended, their words flowing easily, unburdened by time. He told her he was a writer, new to the town, searching for something unnamed. She told him she was a painter, trying to hold on to things that couldn't stay. Their voices mingled with the hush of the sea, blending into something unspoken but real. When he asked what she painted, she answered softly, "Not what I see, but what I feel." He smiled, and for the first time she felt her soul mirrored in someone else's silence. Back in her room that night, Alara couldn't sleep. The sound of the tide was louder than usual, like it carried someone's heartbeat. She sat by the window, sketching without looking, her hand moving on instinct. The page filled with lines that felt unfamiliar, yet achingly right. A figure standing in fog, looking back. She paused, realizing it was him. For the first time in years, she felt the dangerous thrill of possibility. Not yet love, but its first echo. She smiled faintly, unaware that the same sea she found comfort in would one day swallow her peace whole. Spring arrived quietly, melting the gray of winter into color. The days stretched longer, and Alara found herself drawn to the same places where Adrian's words seemed to linger in the air. They began meeting often, by the shore, in the cafe, beneath the old willow that overlooked the sea. What started as casual conversation turned into something more profound. Shared silence, familiar laughter, the unspoken rhythm of two people beginning to orbit each other's lives. He read her fragments of stories he never finished. She showed him paintings she never planned to reveal. In those moments, time became elastic, days folding into one another until her world was painted in his presence. Love, she realized, didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it bloomed quietly, like light finding its way through the fog. Adrian's stories fascinated her. They were always about longing, about searching for something that could never truly be found. When she asked if they were about him, he smiled, avoiding the question. There was a melancholy in his voice, something like truth buried beneath beauty. Alara felt it each time he read. The ache between his sentences, She wanted to reach into his words and mend whatever he was trying to hide. Her loyalty began to take root there, growing from empathy into something stronger, something dangerous. She didn't realize that the same words that made her love him would one day be the ones to break her. Maeve noticed the change before Alara did. Their coffee meetings grew quieter. Alara's thoughts drifted. Her words softened into daydreams. Maeve teased her gently, but concern flickered beneath the laughter. She had seen this kind of devotion before. The kind that consumed rather than nurtured. "Just promise me you won't lose yourself in him," she said one afternoon, her tone half playful, half worn. Alara smiled, brushing it off, her heart too full to imagine loss. To her, Adrian was the calm after years of storm. She didn't yet see that love can be both anchor and tide, holding you steady while pulling you deeper. One evening, Adrian took Alara to a small gallery by the harbor, a hidden place that smelled of varnish and rain. He said he wanted to show her something. On the far wall hung one of her own paintings, the one she'd sold months ago to a stranger. "I bought it," he admitted quietly, "before I even knew your name." The confession left her breathless. She turned to him, eyes wide, realizing he had seen her long before she'd ever noticed him. He reached for her hand then, and the world seemed to still. Outside, the waves crashed against the harbor walls, as if the sea itself was trying to speak. After the gallery, they walked along the harbor in silence. The night smelled of salt and rain, the air electric with unspoken emotion. Alara felt her heart moving faster, her hand warm in his. When he stopped and turned toward her, his eyes were steady. No mystery now, only sincerity. "You make me want to stay," he said softly. She smiled, not realizing the weight those words carry. Beneath the streetlight's glow, he kissed her, and the world dissolved into quiet light. For that one moment, it felt eternal, as if love could be written into the very air they breathed. Summer came heavy with warmth, and with it, a quiet change. Alara noticed it first in the way Adrian paused between sentences, how his gaze drifted elsewhere when she spoke. Their laughter still came easily, but it lingered less. He began to disappear into his writing, long nights spent behind closed doors, pages whispering secrets she wasn't allowed to read. She told herself it was his process, that art required solitude, but somewhere deep within, unease began to bloom. The air between them felt different, as though love itself had caught its breath. She painted more, trying to capture what she feared she was losing, but each canvas only mirrored her confusion. Maeve saw it immediately. The distant tone in Alara's voice, the exhaustion hidden behind her smile. Over coffee, one morning, she asked gently if everything was all right. Alara lied, saying it was just the weather, or maybe the pressure of painting too much. But Maeve's silence said she didn't believe her. "Love shouldn't make you feel small," Maeve whispered before leaving. The words stayed with Alara long after, echoing like a truth she didn't want to face. That evening, she sat by the shore, watching the waves crash in patterns that no longer comforted her. The sea, once her sanctuary, now mirrored her restlessness. Days turned into weeks, and Adrian grew quieter. His stories became darker, his pages filled with shadows Alara couldn't reach. One evening, she entered his study while he was out, drawn by the soft lamplight and the scent of ink. On his desk, she found a page written in his familiar hand, lines about a woman who loved too deeply and a man who forgot how to love her back. The words pierced her because they weren't fiction, they were them. When he returned and saw her holding the page, something sharp flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, but fear. He said nothing. She placed the paper down and left, the silence heavier than any argument could have been. They didn't speak for 2 days. When they finally did, it was at the pier where they'd first met. The fog rolled in thick, the air damp and cold. Alara asked if he still loved her. her voice breaking on the word, "Still." Adrian hesitated, searching for something to hold on to, but his silence spoke louder than any denial. She looked out over the water, realizing that sometimes love doesn't end in anger. It fades in exhaustion. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. The space between them filled with everything they couldn't say, and the sea carried it away. That night, Ilara painted until dawn. She didn't know what she was creating, only that she had to. The strokes were violent, desperate, as if she could paint her pain out of existence. When the first light of morning touched the canvas, she stepped back and froze. It was a self-portrait, her reflection staring back, eyes full of love and ruin. She sank to the floor, brush still in hand, as tears streaked through the colors. The sea murmured outside her window, indifferent and endless. Somewhere beyond it, the version of her that had believed in forever began to fade. Autumn returned with its gray winds and restless tides. Ilara and Adrian existed like strangers sharing the same silence. He stayed out later, his excuses vague, his smile rehearsed. Each night she waited by the window, tracing the moonlight across her palm as if it could explain the distance between them. One evening, Maeve came to her door, eyes heavy with something unsaid. She hesitated before speaking, her voice low. "Ilara, you need to see something." What she showed her wasn't words, but a photograph. Adrian, under the same willow they once sat beneath, holding another woman's hand. In that instant, the air inside Ilara's chest vanished. The world didn't break with noise. It broke with silence. Ilara didn't cry that night. Instead, she walked to the pier through the storm, the wind cutting across her skin like the truth itself. She needed to see the sea, the one place that had never lied to her. Waves collided violently against the rocks, echoing her heartbeat. She whispered his name once, and the wind swallowed it whole. The realization came sharp. Love had made her loyal, but loyalty had made her blind. The storm didn't scare her anymore. She belonged to it now. For the first time, she understood that love without honesty is just devotion to an illusion. By morning, she found herself outside Adrian's apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked the same. His books, his scattered papers, the scent of him lingering like memory. On his desk sat another letter, written to the woman from the photograph. She read the first line, and that was enough. It wasn't anger that filled her, but a hollow quiet. She left the letter where it was and turned toward the window, watching the world go on as if nothing had happened. Her hands shook as she placed her key on the table beside his, the sound small but fine. When Adrian came home, he found the letter untouched, but the air changed. Ilara was gone, her presence lingering like a ghost in the scent of paint and salt. He sat on the floor, staring at the key she'd left behind, and for the first time the weight of what he'd done pressed down on him. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the town drenched and quiet. He thought about calling her, but new words couldn't rebuild what silence had already destroyed. The house felt smaller now, the walls echoing with her absence, an emptiness louder than guilt. Ilara didn't return home that night. She wandered until dawn led her back to the shore, where the first light met the receding tide. Exhaustion overtook her, but within it was a strange calm. She realized that survival wasn't found in holding on. It was in learning to let go. She sat in the wet sand, watching the horizon shift from black to gold. The sea no longer looked cruel. It looked honest. For the first time in months, she smiled. Small, fragile, but real. Behind her, the town was waking, unaware that a woman had just reclaimed herself from the wreckage of love. Days blurred into one another, time slipping through Ilara's fingers like sand. The house felt foreign. Every brushstroke, every painting carried the echo of him. She stopped painting altogether. Canvases leaned blank against the wall, accusing her in their silence. Maeve visited often, trying to draw her back to the world, but Alara's voice came in whispers, her eyes somewhere far away. Nights were the worst. The sea outside her window sounded too much like his absence. Yet beneath the ache, something fragile began to stir. Not hope, not yet, but a quiet endurance, the kind that grows in those who have been broken but refuse to disappear. That night, Alara walked the coastline until the moon rose high. The tide mirrored her loneliness, pulling away everything familiar. She found herself whispering to the waves, fragments of apologies, questions, fragments of herself. The sea answered in rhythm, patient and ancient. She realized then that love had not destroyed her. She had done that herself, by giving everything without leaving anything to keep her standing. The revelation didn't heal her, but it steadied her. Pain became her companion, silent but honest. In the following weeks, Alara tried to return to painting. At first, the brush felt foreign, heavy in her hand. The colors refused to blend. The canvas resisted her touch. But persistence has a way of softening walls. Slowly, the shapes began to form again. Not of faces or love, but of landscapes, wild and untamed. Maeve watched quietly from the corner, saying nothing, understanding everything. "It's not about him anymore," Alara said one morning, her voice fragile but firm. "It's about me." It was the first time her words sounded like truth. One afternoon, Alara wandered into the old bookshop where she had first seen Adrian. The bell above the door chimed the same way it did that morning months ago, but the sound no longer pierced her. The owner greeted her warmly, unaware of the story these walls had witnessed. She walked the aisles slowly, fingers brushing the spines of forgotten novels, breathing in the scent of paper and dust. On a small table near the window, she found one of Adrian's books, the same words that had once bound them together. She smiled faintly, then placed it back. Some stories, she realized, were meant to end, so new ones could begin. That evening, Alara climbed the cliffs overlooking the sea, the same cliff she once painted but never dared to stand upon. The sky blazed orange and violet, the horizon infinite. She breathed in deeply, the salt air cutting through her chest, cleansing what remained of her sorrow. She realized she was no longer waiting for him to come back. She was waiting for herself to arrive. The woman she was becoming through the wreckage. As the sun dipped beneath the water, she whispered a final goodbye, not to Adrian, but to the version of herself who believed love had to hurt. The first chill of winter crept through the town, carrying whispers of endings. Alara felt it not as loss, but as renewal. She had stopped counting the days since she last saw Adrian, though his absence had become a familiar shadow in her memory. One evening, as she was leaving the gallery where her new collection hung, she saw him across the street. Time slowed. He looked different. Older, quieter, as though remorse had carved its own lines into his face. Their eyes met for the first time since that storm, and the world went still. The ache that once would have undone her no longer held power. She took a breath, steady and sure. Fate had brought him back not to reopen the wound, but to prove it had healed. He crossed the street slowly, the sound of his footsteps muted by falling snow. "You look different," he said finally, voice low, uncertain. She smiled faintly. "I am." There was no anger in her tone, only calm understanding. He spoke of regret, of mistakes he couldn't undo. His words trembled with sincerity, but they no longer carried the weight they once did. Alara listened, not to forgive, but to let go. When he asked if she ever thought of what they had, she answered gently, "Every day, but not the way you think." She looked at him one last time and realized she didn't miss him anymore. She missed who she was before she believed she wasn't enough. After that night, Alara returned to the cliffs, not in sorrow, but in closure. She carried one of her paintings with her, the last of the series she had begun after he left. It depicted the sea at dawn, wild yet beautiful, a reflection of her own becoming. As she stood at the edge, wind cutting across her face, she let the painting fall. It landed in the waves below, carried away in fragments of color and foam. She didn't flinch. What she had lost no longer defined her. What she had rebuilt was hers alone. The sea, once the keeper of her pain, now carried her release. Maeve found her later that morning standing by the water's edge, her expression unreadable but peaceful. They walked together along the beach without speaking. Maeve didn't ask about Adrian. She didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was understanding. "You're different," Maeve said softly. "No," Elara replied, a small smile curving her lips. "I'm finally myself." The tide washed over their footprints, erasing the past behind them. The friendship that had weathered every heartbreak now stood as the anchor that kept Elara from drifting. For the first time, she felt not the weight of loyalty, but the strength of it. That night, Elara returned to her studio and painted until dawn. Not from sadness, but from peace. Her brush moved freely, creating light instead of shadow. Each stroke felt like breathing again. When she finally stepped back, she realized she had painted not the sea, but herself, standing before it, unafraid. The colors glowed with warmth. Gold for forgiveness, blue for memory, crimson for love, reborn as strength. She sat beside the painting, her hands trembling not from pain but from awe. Healing, she understood now, wasn't loud. It arrived quietly, like morning light spilling through an open window. The days grew longer again, sunlight returning like forgiveness. Elara's gallery exhibition opened in the heart of the town. A collection titled The Tide Within. Each piece told her story in color and silence. Love, loss, and the quiet miracle of beginning again. People wandered through the gallery, pausing before her canvases as seeing their own reflections in her healing. Elara moved through the crowd calmly, her presence serene, no longer fragile but luminous. For the first time, she wasn't defined by what had broken her. She was defined by how she rose. Among the visitors stood Lucien, the quiet photographer who had once captured her paintings for local exhibitions. He approached her gently, his camera slung over his shoulder. "You've changed," he said softly. "No," she replied, smiling. "I just finally see myself clearly." He asked if he could photograph her again, not as the woman who had been hurt, but as the artist she had become. She agreed. The click of his camera was soft, almost reverent, like the sound of a page turning. For the first time, she felt comfortable being seen, not through the eyes of love, but through the eyes of truth. As the evening faded, Elara walked alone to the pier where everything had begun. The air was cool and still, the sea calm beneath a sky streaked with fading light. She remembered every version of herself that had stood here, the dreamer, the lover, the broken one, the survivor. They all lived within her, no longer in conflict, but in harmony. She whispered a thank you to the wind, for the lessons, for the pain, for the beauty of starting over. The water glimmered in reply, infinite and kind. She began teaching art soon after, offering classes in the small community studio overlooking the harbor. Her students were young, uncertain, full of the same tenderness she once carried. "Art," she told them, "isn't about perfection. It's about truth." She spoke with warmth, her voice steady, her smile patient. Watching them paint, she felt the circle complete. From creation to loss, to creation again. She understood now that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about turning it into color, into something that could outlive sorrow. On the final morning of winter, Elara stood once more by the shore, barefoot on the cold sand. The wind carried no ghosts now, only promise. She watched the horizon ignite with sunrise, the sky spilling gold over the waves. Her heart felt full, not with love for another, but with love for herself. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the salt air filling her lungs. The past was not gone. It had transformed into strength. The sea whispered its final benediction, and Alara smiled. Some stories end in heartbreak. Hers ended in becoming.